Tara and I are here, March 8th, 8:30 a.m., starting our day, saying hello. There's no preamble to this conversation, just a conversation. And so we get together to talk about the mental obsession, sobriety in the emotional sense that's beyond the recovery of the alcohol and the drugs and any of the other compulsions that are obvious, but yet a lack of emotional sobriety always contains other compulsions or compulsive behaviors. Impulsive, reactive, and compulsive behaviors are pretty much the same bundle. So if I find I have those activities, I can be assured that I am maintaining a thought that is not true and making believe that it is true. And that in a conflict, or a thought that is true and I think it isn't true, whatever the combination of those is that I'm doing, like the idea that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing while I'm doing what I'm doing, creates an internal conflict. And it's caused by my choice, my thinking, because of the choice I'm making to use my thinking that way. My thinking isn't doing this independently of me. It is actually doing it as a response or a reaction to the question I'm asking it to do. If I'm asking it to turn what's wrong into right, I'm asking it to do the impossible. And so my life can feel impossible and the struggle can feel impossible. And I can feel like I'm a victim when I'm in fact the cause and not just solely the effect of that. So, but some of what we're talking about. One of the things I wanted to pick up where we left off last time, Sarah,
Yes.
is the idea that practical ideas about how to kind of manage daily living. The concept of, what are things we can do today to feel better, right? Breathing deeply, we talked about, working out can help, meditating can help, going to meetings, associating to other people, writing, reading, being open, listening, interacting, giving, serving, doing for others, all that kind of stuff can feel better. But if the goal of those practical solutions is to avoid the most impractical aspect of our thinking, which is making believe that our sole source in life is our thinking, rather than we have a knowing awareness that we cannot escape, that we do not need to think we know, that we do not need to think we can comprehend to apprehend or to have that knowingness, then all of those other flutters and management styles are trying to develop exactly what we did when we were drinking and using, which is to feel better about what's wrong. So my experience is that while they may be practical in certain respects in relation to the most severe compulsions that we have recovered from, in the broader sense, as recovery continues, the real recovery is emotional sobriety, where we begin to actually live sanely rather than simply act sanely in relation to the one compulsion that we have overcome, or the two or three, or however the many. If they're a present experience we're creating, and depression is the byproduct, and anxiety is the byproduct, and anxious disorders and nervous disorders and metabolic disorders and all those other things are byproducts of this stress that we're creating, it would be worth looking at that and just beginning to concede it isn't something we need to think we're doing to have. It isn't something I need to think I know to know. Thinking is irrelevant to this absolute state of being. And if the big book and other people through history are correct, and they're talking about omniscient and omnipotent and omnipresent essences, they're talking about right here, right now, which is why it's called right here, right now, because it is all that is right here now.
Okay, my turn.
Go.
All right. A few things. So many things, actually.
I was going to say a few. What?
I'm not going to touch the big one because you'll want to respond, but I'll start in order of my notes from just your introduction that you just gave, and what you reminded me of in terms of we maintain a thought that's true or false. We think it's true and it's false, or we think it's false and it's true. That reminded me of cognitive dissonance theory.
Yes.
And that is so helpful for me, just learning about that, which I heard in college, and I like grabbed onto it. I'm like, that makes sense. I could apply that to my life. When I'm aware and I have a name for it, in this case, cognitive dissonance, and I'll give a summary of my understanding of it, whether or not you have to fact check, but I want, I'll use this example that's really arbitrary. So I am, let's just say, oh, I'll tell you a story about someone else. Okay, so dude lived like off the earth and he was not into like modern medicine and was very uh all natural remedies, and saw like the witch doctor in the neighborhood. I think this was in Africa. I'm not sure. Maybe it was South America. And was riding his bike and broke his arm. And the community and he himself are like, I can't go to the hospital. Like, this is like, we don't believe in that. We don't believe in modern medicine, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, he had a broken arm and they could not fix it. It was so bad that it needed like actual surgery if he wanted to keep his arm. So maybe this isn't the best example, but like that cognitive dissonance in terms of you're doing something that goes against your values, but you're doing it anyway.
Yes.
So I guess the example, we can just throw that out and just go to the definition. So when we're feeling or having a belief about something and we think it's true and it's false, or we think it's false and it's true, it's that same idea of the cognitive dissonance in terms of you have that internal conflict that is caused by this mismatch of things. One, it's cognitive dissonance being your values or what you think is right, and then you're doing something opposite, or one being your thoughts. So that's the first thing. And you can just notate if you have any comments or clarity that you want to add to that. The other thought is you listed these practical solutions, right? So breathing, just breathing. It doesn't have to be deep breathing, just reminding yourself. Oh, sorry, let me back up. I wasn't done. When I have a name for it, the cognitive dissonance, I know I'm doing it and I can settle that in my mind. So just being aware, oh, I don't feel right about this, but I'm making this decision anyway because I do the cost benefits and I'm going to do this anyway. I raise my children in suburbia, but I feel like they're lacking culture because they're being raised in suburbia. And I have dissonance with that. So I know I'm making that decision anyway, and I could take them to, the city and do Second Saturday or whatever, and like expose them to art and culture and all of that they don't get here in the neighborhood. So having a name for it is really helpful. And how that applies to our conversation here is the value of being aware of your thoughts and being aware when maybe they're not matching. You need to be open-minded, willing, honest, and you got to do the work, right? So these things are necessary. You got to be open, honest, willing, and you have to actually do the work if you want to connect to this knowing or reap the benefits or balance out that internal conflict, however you want to put it. To balance that internal conflict, you need to be open, willing, honest, and you got to put in the work. And when we talk about put in the work, so having a name for it is really helpful. So maybe we need to name this internal conflict, or we could just call it internal conflict. I'm having internal conflict. What can I do about that? What is my thinking? Where is the disconnect? Where's the dissonance here? So these practical solutions, that's what leads me into the practical solutions. They actually do help you name it, figure out what you're doing, and work your way out of that to balance that internal conflict. The breathing, the exercising, the meetings, the journaling, the talking to people, the reading, again, remaining open-minded, honest, willing, and doing the effort. It doesn't necessarily make you feel better about the wrong, though it may. You get runner's high, you're going to feel better about the wrong, right? But it can actually work. All of these practical solutions work as a therapeutic tool to help balance out your awareness and that internal conflict with whatever is not jiving, right? Wherever's causing that conflict, you can get awareness when you go to meetings and you talk to people, or when you call your sponsor, or when you exercise. It's a form of meditation. Deep breathing, going for a walk, all of these things, meditation itself, sitting down and quiet, all of these, I like the term practical solutions. I would argue actually absolutely are necessary for emotional sobriety. And here's why. I'll conclude with this. We act our way into right thinking. And so when we're in that loop of wrong thinking, we have to physically act our way out of it. We can't tell ourselves, this is wrong thinking, I need to think something else. So I will stop there. I have one more thing, but I don't think that it's connected necessarily to that train of thought, so I'll hold it for later.
Okay. So this is all very rational. As definition is a function of language, it's coming out of thinking. Things that don't think don't have languages typically, even though they express the essence of their blade of grass. It's a blade of grass. It's expressing its awareness by being a blade of grass, doing what it's doing. So my focus isn't so much, since we're not talking about sobriety as sobriety has been talked about, but starting to talk about it in an infinite absolute sense. I'm not thinking about the individual thoughts. I'm thinking about thinking. So if I can resolve issues that I'm doing wrong with thinking in general, I resolve all those thoughts, not just one, not just the one I think I'm stuck on having to figure out every day. And I finally get it resolved and I find there's another one to work on and another one to work. And I'm going to do that the rest of my life. Rather than just start to say that there is what you're describing, Tara, in my experience, is that by beginning to do those things, which are all things that we learn in sobriety initially, because we're so hell-bent on doing the wrong thing, we start doing things that actually approach a rightness that produces some value and gives us some room to breathe, and actually gives us some room to realize that we can be productive and useful and whole. But what we're really doing is showing that what we thought was intractable and impossible to overcome is actually very flexible. We can have any thought we want. And to know that is to start to begin to admit that if it's a principle, it's not because I'm admitting it that it's true. I'm simply beginning to align my thinking with existing truth of the freedom I have and how thoughts actually are, rather than how I think they are in insanity. When I think all that I'm thinking is reality, when in fact what I'm thinking is wrong, and the conflicting nature of my understanding that something's wrong is actually my body language telling me I'm wrong. It's happening, not because of some strange confluence, but because I am aware and I do know. But I'm discounting that knowledge and awareness because it's not confined in the thinking form, the language form, the definitive form. I'm thinking all that I am is what I think, and I have to figure everything out through the same insane thinking and wonder why the problems just morph into a new problem with a different face in a different place at a different time, somebody else, somewhere else, some other thing. So my discussion here, the idea of the mental obsession, is starting to see that if you can see that the conflicted thoughts are lies, if I'm trying to turn false into truth, that's obviously not possible. It's a lie. I don't have to think I'm lying to be suffering the consequence of what it means to lie, which is to make believe that I have to be very wary of everyone else's awareness of what I might be doing, and defensive and kind of reactive and on guard, and feel like I get overwhelmed when people breach the boundaries of my limits that I'm defending, of the limited ideas. So that's the first transition into this. The second thing is that there's no way out of an infinite source. When we think we're not in it, it doesn't mean we're not in it any more than when we think we don't know better, we don't know better. We're just thinking those things. Because the nature of those sick thoughts are always going to spawn more and more corrupt thoughts as long as we manage them. That's how it works. I will always, like the seed, if the seed is poisoned, the tree is going to be damaged. It's just natural. So if I begin to see that these are natural consequences, not things that are being hoisted on me because I've been singled out, but the terms of life in reality are already set. The terms of life are that if it's real, it's functional, it's useful, it's productive. If it's imagined to be real, I'm thinking reality needs my imagination to fulfill it. It's not true. I can transform reality while I am not creating reality. And my thinking is not the creator of reality, it's simply manifesting effects that I then mistake for reality and think I am condemned by life and everyone else at the same time. And it's all done within the insanity of my thinking. And now I'm not referring to insanity. I'm going to stop referring to insanity broadly and consider this more an induced state of insanity, one that the individual creates by making believe what they're thinking is right when it's wrong. And so the easy way to tell that for all thinking, not just the thought I'm thinking about now and the thing I think I've got to get over, and then find out there's another one and another one and another one, is to start thinking that all the disturbance I feel that I think is wrong in my perception of the world and everyone else and my own experience is a result of those wrong thoughts, the whole collection of them, not just one of them. Culturally, mythologically, superstition, all the things I've grown up to make believe somehow or another are just facts that aren't facts at all. My body is telling me clearly something is wrong with what I'm thinking. If I can come to terms with that and just simply live with that without trying to fix it, without trying to overcome it, without trying to feel better than it, without trying to get over it or through it, I start to actually be open, honest, and willing to listen to the information my body's been attempting to explain to me while I have been busy trying to escape it by doing all of these other practical solutions to feel better. I've been using them as defenses the same way I use drinking, the same way I smoke pot, the same way I did coke. They were all escape attempts. When in fact, if I'm causing it and inducing it, getting away with it, and the way we think of getting away with a lie with others, do they believe it? Am I caught for it? Am I going to get caught? Am I going to get outed? The getting away with it in mental conditions means exactly that. Everywhere we go, it goes with us. We never get away from it. So I can feel better about it for 10 minutes and I can feel better about it for 10 years. But my body is bearing the stress of what's worse because I have not directed my attention at the cause. I've been simply treating the effect as though it's separate from the cause, meaning it's some strange confluence of events and I have nothing to do with it. And if I have nothing to do with something, certainly I would have no hope in being able to ever do anything about that thing.
So I hear what you're saying, and I do not disagree. I mean, from what I understand of what you said, I do not disagree. I think where I'm going, I think what you're presenting is really for somebody who's been around the rooms for a while. Or I'm thinking of the really broken person. How do we baby step them? I feel like you're asking them to start on step 10, 11, 12. And I'm like, wait a minute. We need those practical solutions to slowly move them to this awareness that there's this all-knowing God. You think I'm focusing on individual thinking and that these practical solutions are to fix these one-offs, like kind of putting out fires. And you're saying, no, they need a paradigm shift. They need to see that this loving thing is here all the time. But we don't start with step 2, 3, or 11. We start with step 1. And so I feel like there's so much wisdom in what you're saying, but people can't jump from a broken emotional state. Not everyone can jump from a very broken, very confused, misleading habits of thought. It's a habit, right? These thoughts, all of this is like this reality that the world works in a certain way. We can't flip a switch and say, oh, just know that there's this all knowing and don't forget it and everything will be fine. So these practical solutions are really moving them to this higher level of understanding. And then these practical solutions aren't as necessary. They're just part of our living, and they're not a solution. They're just part of living in the knowing. Should I go for a walk today or should I go to the gym? There's like that intuition that we're trying to get people connected to, but we can't just tell them it's there and they need to believe it.
Well, that's a presumption and a decision and a thought. And you will be sure to find those people out there that you will assign that to and make sure that they can't do exactly what they're capable of doing based on your insistence that your thought is true. This is how this works.
I mean,
So,
I've been around the rooms long enough and I've worked with enough newcomers to know, at least for us that are alcoholics, we typically don't come in all willing and ready to be spiritual. We just want to stop drinking. So I'm speaking from experience and mass numbers of newcomers. I'm sure there are plenty of people in the world that are not in that same boat where they have a major addiction that they're trying to solve.
let's just presume that it's you and I talking today, and that the ideas you may or may not have about everyone else, if they're real and true, they will obviously affect everyone else in the best way, if they're real, if they're true, if they're accurate. That naturally, if I'm helping promote the idea that someone else is struggling with an illusion being reality, and I am now under the illusion that that struggle has to be respected, I'm missing the point that they're in reality. The reason they're struggling is because they know better and they have an awareness, and that's why they know something's wrong. Now, people don't always know it's wrong. Within the addictive cycle of thinking, everything gets turned backwards because I'm trying to turn what's wrong into right. I'm trying to turn what's false into truth or truth into false. Everything's backward. So I can be thinking from a sick, insane point of view, but it's just a delusion. And for me to sit here and basically condemn any portion of the rest of the world as being incapable of recognizing that is to commit to the same psychology that has led us to this point and give them less opportunity to begin to recognize that they've already, if they're standing in any, they've already been willing. They've just been willing to do the wrong thing. They know how to be willing. They know how to have faith. They've just had faith in the wrong thing. They've been, if I'm going to make believe with them that their make believe is reality, I am now complicitous in helping cement them in that direction. And
I don't think I said anything about signing off on people's bullshit. I absolutely did not say
though,
that.
when
What
do you
I'm
think
saying
that
is I feel like you might be coming from a place that's lacking humility because we don't have the power to use the words and tell people what they need.
exactly. So you know what that power is? Ever present, all knowing, all
Right, but
encompassing.
you can't tell somebody that this
Exactly.
exists and they're
Exactly.
thinking wrong and they need to think
Exactly.
this way.
Exactly. You know
So we
why?
need those practical
Hang
solutions. We
tight,
need
hang tight. You know why we can't tell them, Tara? They already know, just like you know right now. You are absolutely, if there's anything absolute, we know we know. The insanity of it is thinking we don't know. And then thinking the thinking we don't know is in fact true and correct. And now we have to straighten the thinking out for everybody else rather than begin to say, wait a minute. If I know, that's why I'm so clear about what's wrong. My body is giving me perfect information about the dysfunctional choices I'm making in my thinking by the struggle, by the anxiety, by the stress, by the psychosis. All of those things are actually saying you're dysfunctioning because you're living in a state of delusion. Book talks about this. I'm taking it now to the absolute sense rather than the limited thinking sense. Bill asked us to completely abandon ourself. What is the self? My thinking about who I am, not who I am. If we're asked to abandon that, utterly abandon, it may not have any value whatsoever to us. And for us to perpetuate the seeming value as a delusion that now is now manageable, that's what the unmanageability of the first step is. Our management formula was to use a drug or use something. And I would say that these tools that we've come to use, even in sobriety, are just new ritualistic compulsions that people do to feel better. And I have watched 40 some people in my life overdose and kill themselves. So I've had enough experience to witness this. And I'm not interested in seeing anyone go through that by babying them by ideas I have about them that aren't true, rather than say, you know. Whether you want to admit it or not is up to you. But I know you know, and you know. Because if there's anything absolute, there is absolutely no possibility that we can't know that thing. And this is fundamental to this discussion. Bill Wilson wrote that emotional sobriety letter in 1957 and talked about it as becoming the next phase of development. Do you know how much of that he saw happen in his lifetime? Almost nothing. And you know what's happened since then? All kinds of developed programs on how to feel better about what's wrong, while thinking the insanity is actually real. We're giving credit to insanity as being so real that people can't overcome it. I'm helping them get worse by thinking that. I can think that, and in some cases I do. I still have plenty of shortcomings, and I still have plenty of ideas baked into my seeming system that I presume I haven't even looked at yet, because I don't always look honestly and I don't always look quickly. But I know the consequences now. I know the depression when it comes. I know the moodiness when it comes. I know that all of that stuff is being rocked because my shifting, everything's moving in directions that I think are out of my control. So you and I, right here, right now, have a potential to have a conversation based on the absolute premise that, first of all, thoughts are in action. I'll give you another principle. Thoughts are in action because there's something that happens and there's something we choose to do. And to think that the only actions are the ones that we're finally expressing is to miss the fact. Here we go again. We're dealing with the effect and not the cause. We're missing the fact that every one of those actions that we're told to take contrary actions to is coming from a contrary thought. And dissonance is like discontent. It's disharmonious because it's a collision of something that doesn't exist with something that does, an attempt to turn it into what does exist, as though we are the creators of reality. We don't create reality, we transform existing reality. Reality's been here as long as reality's been here. It's a transformation because this is a life form. This isn't life, it's a form of life, a possibility of life, our bodies. And our bodies have brains. These are things we do with the body. If I think I'm irresponsible or can be, I'm missing the fact that I'm absolutely responsible simply based on my existence. And to miss that point is to set up this whole thing of trying to take responsibility rather than admit I'm already responsible, but I can think irresponsibly by thinking insanity is reality. This induced state, again, I'm not trying to include everybody who may be born with collective defects of having subjected a DNA. Our DNA is constantly adjusting and adapting to the environment. Imagine what DNA has done through the history of humanity, adjusting to the environment of nervousness and anxiety that's been induced by these ideas of rightness and righteousness and opposition to other people, opposition to reality. Imagine what that does to us at the most primal level in terms of feeling horrified about life and feeling the best thing we can do is be violent and try to overcome people and oppress them and suppress them and dominate them, kill them. It's been going on through history. There's some evidence we have not been healthy thinking about our thinking. And I would say we're in a day and age where this might be worth noting, and at least just talking about it. It doesn't have to be anything anyone does. It isn't a requirement. It's simply a chance and an opportunity to look and say, maybe we've been wrong. We've done it before through history. People stood on the earth and looked into the sky and thought that we were at the center of it because that's where they were looking from. People stood on the earth and looked at the horizon and thought that was the end of the world. Those things, once they were seen correctly, actually allowed astronomy to be recognized in a way that functioned according to how things were actually functioning. So it began to develop rather than create more wonkiness and more dissonance. What is that? Discord. It's a collision. It's a disharmony. The universe, as I understand it, is constantly seeking harmony, and it goes through its own harmony, but it's naturally doing that. It's naturally pulsating on that. Things collide and they develop and they collide and they develop, but they're doing it perfectly. They're not doing it as a resistance to something. They're not doing it as a choice.
It's just a natural functional capacity. We're imposing this by choosing. And we are responsible for that as a species, not you and I alone, but you and I and everyone else together. And when I see it that way, I have a better chance of that person starting to see things like that. What's a moment of clarity for somebody? What's intuition? Intuition is knowledge beyond reason. It means no thinking, no understanding, no rationale, no reason, no logic. None of the things that apply to thinking are knowing. What does the book say? We will no longer be baffled. What are we baffled by? Constantly thinking about our thinking is the source. Constantly thinking, we've developed a way of dealing with it because we can show that things that seem intractable can be flexible. That isn't news. That's just a use of things to begin to show that if things can be moved, they've never been intractable. We've just been acting as though they were, just like we act as though this absolute nature is something to get to later. But what we really need to do now is develop more thinking about it to arrive there.
So I feel like you're saying have more conversations about this, and that is helpful to humanity or the individual that's having conversations. I feel like sometimes, not sometimes, when I really want to get through to other people, I don't lecture them. I ask them questions so they can get there themselves. And that is the most powerful outcome of breathing, exercise, meetings, journal, reading. That is the coming to the awareness, coming to the aha moment. You can't lecture me into an aha moment. Occasionally it happens. You'll hear a comment and you're like, whoa, that changes everything. But mostly my aha moments come from my thinking. And my thinking is only changed when I get out of my physical routine. When I'm feeling depressed, you know what? I'm in this cycle of feeling not good. I'm going to go do these things that I know will get me out of this cycle of thinking that is causing internal conflict.
So let me stop you for 1 second. When you're believing it, when you think you can make it true, you think you're in it. See how you're talking about it? I can get out of it. You're not really in it. It's just a delusion of thinking, giving you that impression to think there's something you need to do. And now you're reinforcing the insanity of it versus realizing you're never in it.
Well, you can't just tell me when I'm in a depressive chemical state of darkness to just think differently. I mean, that's really what you're essentially saying. You're just need to know that there's this ever-knowing thing and you'll feel fine.
So are you in a depressed state right now?
No.
Okay, so if we can't talk about it now when you're not, there's a very good chance you'll never listen when you are.
Well, do you want to talk about it or do you want to lecture me on it?
Well, it seems to me I'm talking about it. I've made very clear that my thoughts are my experience and I'm sharing them for consideration, not as a demand.
I don't know. I feel like everything I share, or 95% of what I share, you have a rebuttal to, as opposed to, oh, I never thought about it that way. Like you say that our conversations help you see things differently, but you don't ever share that in recording. In recording, there's only rebuttal. There's never, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Let me think about that some more. I'll get back to you. There's a lack of actual open-mindedness when I speak and you respond.
Well, I'm not sure what the script should be to have me say what I'm doing is what I'm doing, because I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm always affected by everything that's happening to some degree. And I'm always interacting with, I'm doing my best to come to a conversation that we can have that conveys something that can't be spoken about in words, but can certainly be contemplated as a reference of those words. So I don't see it as a rebuttal as much as I see that if I'm engaging only in the thinking end, there's no point for this conversation. We'd all do that. We've been doing that through human history. And if we've been doing it, it's just like the alcoholic that they never had a solution for. They used to write them off and kill them and send them out of town and get rid of them. And if we're continuing to do that, that is not my interest at all. I am not here to do that. whatsoever. The only reason I do this publicly is to offer people the chance to look and notice that if they have a knowing awareness and actually begin to concede that they may have a knowing awareness, even if they say I may have a knowing awareness, and live with that, that there are some shifts that go on. I've watched people who have lifelong had panic attacks start to have them dissipate and disappear almost completely, simply by beginning to realize that there is a stable nature that is our nature. And just beginning to contemplate it, not agree with it, not take it on as a new crusade, just consider it. So my interest is in addressing what I hear in a way that would reflect what I know, and start to actually engage in a conversation based on absolute concepts rather than relative ideas about how to manipulate and how to influence and how to make things better and worse. That's not my
I don't know if
interest.
it's manipulating, because you're saying I want them to look, I want them to notice, I want them to contemplate. And I'm
It's
thinking,
not them, though, Tara. It's not them. You here now is what I'm working with.
okay, well, I'm thinking about, so if you want me to look and notice and contemplate, if I'm in a depressed state and I'm laying in bed,
Right now.
you're not going to get me to look and notice and
I
contemplate.
know, but you're not in a depressed state and you're not willing to look right now.
I don't,
You're
I
using
don't,
other times and other places and other situations that aren't happening to simply say that condition wouldn't allow me to do it, while you're not saying, wow, what if I am? What if I do know that I know? What if I have a knowing awareness and I've always thought it was thinking that got me there, rather than realize it can't be anywhere in its full implication wherever I am. It can't be anywhere else.
I don't get into depressed states, just so you know, in sobriety, because I do all these practical things. I don't get in that state.
But think about it. So you have a management style to keep you from what would otherwise be very depressing.
No, all of the things I do is what connects me to my higher power and what grows my relationship with source. So my daily readings, my affirmation cards, my prayers, getting on my knees, these are acts of love to the universe. These are acts of connecting to those that have passed. These are acts of reminding myself of this all knowing, because it's easy to get caught in the life of, I have a podcast, I have 3 kids, I have PTA, I'm on the board, I have a full-time job, I have sponsees, I have a sponsor, I have meetings, I have. So it's easy for me to get caught up in the run of life. So these acts, these practical solutions, I mean, we can just call them all meditation. They're all forms of meditation, are
Yes.
significant to my constant state of all knowing. My knowing is always there. It's always been there since I can remember. I don't doubt that, but the ringer of life makes me forget.
But
And
you
so
talk about it in terms of getting back to that thing and say that you realize all knowing is knowing, and you take that for granted and sort of push it aside, and then talk about not being there while you're thinking those other things, rather than really saying, wow, I go to great lengths to think my thinking is so true that I can't be where I am right now. And it isn't true. All of those other things are being used. I've worked with enough people to have some experience at this. All of those other things are just new management styles.
I totally disagree. They're step 11. They're meditation. So you're saying
exactly. But what do you get in meditation?
Is not necessary?
No, I'm saying we're always in a state of meditation. We're always in a state of full awareness. And it's our thinking that gives us the impression that we're not because it's independent of us, because we're choosing to make believe that we can be apart from that knowingness.
I am not always in a state of meditation.
I understand that's your thought.
Because I have to-do lists, and I have taxes to file, and I have bills, and I have a job I have to answer to.
You're referencing your thinking, and you're referencing circumstances rather than your present state of being. Your present state of being is a source of knowing that doesn't have anything to think about. What is meditation about? It's about noticing that when we give 10 minutes and not paying attention to all those other things, we have a sense of awareness that's pretty profound.
Yes, and I cannot walk around in that state all the time. I have shit to do.
Let me
I have a
ask
house
you a
to run.
question. What if you are in that state and you're so committed to the thinking you're doing that you think you're not? Wouldn't that cause major upheaval in your functional capacity to deal with those things? If you really believe you're not connected, you've now been disconnected. The plug is pulled from the blender and you keep wondering why you can't get the smoothie made. And so you're in there with the thing, whipping it up and whipping it, and doing this, that, and the other thing. And realize you've never been pulled from the cord. It can't be pulled, it's infinite. We're never away from it. It's these ideas we've had. We've developed a whole culture and language to justify that this is all just perfect sanity. It is not.
So so tell me about your opinion of actual meditation. So say I meditate 20 minutes twice a day and I value that. And I feel like you're saying I don't need to do that.
What I said, which you contested, is that you're in a constant state of meditation as a being.
But answer my question. What is your opinion of that?
I'm giving you my opinion. Would you like to hear it, or would you like to tell me?
Well, I hear you saying I'm in a constant state, but specifically, I meditate twice a day, 20 minutes each time. Do you think that is valuable?
I just went through a book by a very famous Japanese Buddhist man that basically supported I've talked to guys that are gurus and major meditation guys. And I said to them, aren't we always in a state? He said, absolutely. Absolutely. This guy that I listened to on the way back recently is a major Japanese Buddhist. And he said, if you're sitting quietly and you think you're meditating, you're not meditating because you're creating an environment that isn't conflicted. He said, if you're in conflict and you recognize you're meditating, now you're meditating. Because we're inducing a state of peace and then thinking when we face all that other stuff, we have no peace anymore, rather than see, why is that peace always there in those 20 minutes when we go look for it? Because we're thinking it's not there because we're no longer we think we left it behind in that 20 minutes and all of a sudden we're out there on the street and I deal with this every day. I understand what you're saying. It doesn't mean that state of being changes. It means that my thinking about it changes, and to think that I'm separate from it causes dramatic dysfunctional tendencies in the choices I make and the conflicts I create and the interactive and interreactiveness I have with everyone else. All of a sudden, my whole state is polluted with this idea that somehow, because I'm not looking, it's not there. When I look for peace and I find it, it's there. But when I don't look, it's not there. It's gone. That's all happening within thought. That's just an illusion being thought of as reality. That's what delusion is. That absolute state of being can't be anywhere else. It's the essence of every molecule and atom in the universe. And everything right now that's happening is based on that. Everything, including you and I and our thinking. And for us to induce...
I'm going to ask again. So I meditate twice a day, 20 minutes each time. Do you think I should continue that?
Absolutely continue.
However, or that's just the end of your sentence?
You're choosing to do that. You're choosing to do that. What I'm telling you is that it doesn't displace your reality. It's just a functional capacity you've learned to do to feel better about things that would otherwise feel conflicted. Why not look at the major conflict as being this idea that we can be separate? So the 11th step, by the way, does not say get a better contact with God. It says improve our conscious contact with God. What does that mean? Improve our thinking about God. What's the thinking we do that isn't conscious? Self-centered thinking. The idea that my thinking about my thinking is all that exists and I'm going to fight for it and defend it and be defensive over it. That's what we've been asked to let go of. Why would we be told to let go of it? Absolutely, if it had any value. It doesn't.
So when I meditate,
yes,
I feel as though I'm quite certain, actually, that the universe communicates to me.
Of course.
And that is where I see and get guidance, just like I do in a meeting when I feel like God speaks to me through other people. So that doesn't mean that when I'm done meditating, I walk away from my all-knowing. it means that it's like exercise. I have to exercise if I want the body I want. I have to exercise if I want to live a long time. I have to take care of my avatar when I eat. Like these, I want to live a long time. That doesn't mean I'm exercising because I have internal conflict. It means it is important to me to have a strong body so that I can live a long time. I put time and energy into my marriage because my husband and my relationship is very important. So I put thoughts and time and energy into that. I do the same thing with the universe. This all knowing is fantastic. But if I'm not meditating and I'm not exercising and I'm not breathing and I'm not meetings and journaling, if I'm not doing all these practical things, I'm not giving that relationship the energy and time that I want to give it. So I can walk around saying, oh, I know my husband and I have a fantastic marriage. I don't need to put practical applications or solutions into my marriage.
But
I don't need to do time and energy.
Relative constraints on an absolute infinite thing is not relative. It isn't something that's optional. It's not negotiable. It's not those things you're describing. Those are all human things that we do in this experience.
But I am human, so I do those things to strengthen that relationship.
Okay, so are you only human? Is that all you are?
No.
Okay, okay, so let's stop there. So let's consider that knowingness of you, that essence of you, that if it is infinite, it's not something that can be divisible. It's indivisible. It doesn't have to be visible to be seen through understanding. And to start to notice it and say, wow, that never changes. What's the difference that distinguishes relative experience and absolute experience is absolute never changes. And relative always changes. And the one thing that doesn't change about the relative is that it's always changing. So when you look at it all completely, rather than in bits and pieces, you can see the absolute starts to reveal itself. And if we're thinking about it from an understanding basis and misunderstanding the basis from which we're thinking, we're asking for a cavalcade of opposition with reality rather than an alignment and expression of that reality. We're asking for that. We're asking for these diseases. We're asking for this anxiety. We're asking for the conflicts and struggle, and we get them because we're asking, because our prayers are answered. Our choices are all prayers. Every one of our choices is a want. And if my wants are sick, I'm going to deny wanting what I get. If I start noticing that it can't be possible that I'm getting what I don't want, except in my thinking about it, because I thought my thinking was so true that all I'd ever get is what I thought. And when it doesn't come, I think my life is threatened and screwed up, and I've got to get it back into control because I really believe my life depends on my thinking. It shows how deeply ingrained this concept of thinking as reality has come. The gurus for thousands of years have said, you're not your thinking.
But you said earlier that your thinking transforms reality.
It can affect reality because
you said it transforms reality.
Yes, and that's an effect. It's transforming by creating effects.
So wouldn't thinking then be as powerful as we say it is?
No, it's just creating human effects. It's not when I create an effect, you don't get that effect. You only sense something may be wrong with me, but you're not getting the same effect any more than you are affected by the dreams I have.
So you're saying prayer doesn't work?
No, I'm saying prayer is always answered. And all our choices are prayers. Every choice has a want attached.
So if you pray for me, you said I wouldn't get the effect of your thoughts, but I would in that case if you believe prayers always answered.
Yes. Well, I would say that we affect each other.
But you just said that I wouldn't be affected by your thoughts.
Okay, so maybe I misspoke. We're always affected by everything everyone is doing all the time and everything that's happening, the sum total of it all. The primary effect that I'm causing is in my own experience, because I have freedom to think. I also have the freedom to have the experience that I create. And I'm creating an experience now. Think about that. All the experience is an imagined collection of information that I've made decisions about.
I mean, that makes thoughts pretty powerful.
Only in terms of my human experience.
Fair enough. So, my human experience is pretty important.
Okay, so now let's talk about the being experience that's all knowing, that doesn't change, that doesn't think.
I'm not here to be a spiritual being. I'm here as a human.
Really?
Really? I'm really
the whole point of the program? Isn't the whole point of the program to turn from finite ideas to infinite source? Isn't that it?
No, it's to be a good person and to be connected to source and
What's the solution? What's the solution? It's a
to
spiritual
help other
solution.
people. Step 12.
No, it's a spiritual solution.
That's the solution to my alcoholism.
We
That
learn to
is,
do that.
that's step 2 and 3, right? But my living as a human is step 10, 11, 12. And that is all focused on my relationship with other people and my relationship with my higher power.
Okay. So if your relationship with your higher power is incorrect because you think it comes and goes according to your thinking is so.
I don't think my relationship with my higher power comes and goes. I think sometimes I am more connected, just like sometimes my husband and I are more connected to each other than others.
But
and the same thing is true.
You can't.
Well, maybe we just have a different of opinion. I don't know why you're saying I'm wrong, because I can
didn't say
absolutely
you're wrong,
be right.
Tara. I didn't say you're wrong any more than you're telling me I'm wrong. I'm simply suggesting you consider that an infinite realm can't have more or less. It's infinite.
I am a human and I can have more or less.
If you are
I'm not just a spiritual being.
If you are only a human.
I never said I was only a human. I'm both. You're suggesting I'm only spiritual.
No, I'm suggesting your primary essence is spiritual. Primary, I mean primary. Secondary, you are a human that thinks. We are byproducts of an absolute source. To have it reversed and think that it's only due to our thinking that gets us there is to think we aren't there until we think it's true. All we're doing is functioning dysfunctionally in that thinking. It isn't because it isn't there, it's because we're causing the effects of dysfunction and disease.
I mean, you're assuming that I'm living in dysfunction.
Look at the world.
Because I'm not thinking the way you're thinking.
How is the world doing, would you say?
I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about me.
We're talking about the interconnectedness of the entirety of our experience. You said to me once, a couple times ago, that when you started considering some of this, you started to see how sick people were. You started to really realize how much,
oh, yes, people are miserable.
Okay, so
generally speaking.
So that's yours. So if service is our job and we're carrying a message that isn't affecting them and helping them, and we're determining for them that they're helpless because they don't think like we do.
I didn't say any of that.
Well,
I don't think they're helpless at all. I think that's the step 12. I get to practice these principles in all of my affairs, in and outside of the rooms. Last night, I went to the school and volunteered for 3 hours. My kids weren't even at the school, and I was doing that for the other parents because they needed help. So
you know that works.
Every interaction I have with every human, I can smile and be kind and be an example of God's love.
So you have no obsessive thoughts and there's no compulsions. There's nothing here that we could actually look at and say, maybe that traces back to this idea that somehow you have some beliefs that thinking is your source and that God comes and goes and that is bigger or smaller because of the relative.
No, I never said God comes and goes. I never said God comes and goes or bigger.
I just asked you though. You talk about it in those terms and may not.
No, you're assuming it's those terms. It is a relationship. And everything in the book talks about your relationship. Step 11 talks about your relationship with your higher power. And I have taken those steps as my truth. And I feel like you're asking me to accept some other truth besides the steps.
No, I'm asking you to read the book and look at it from an absolute standpoint rather than a relative standpoint. The book is designed to take people who have been completely insane and help introduce them to sanity so that we can actually carry a message of love because we start expressing the nature of our nature, which is a loving authority, which is absolutely always loving. It does not come or go, and it does not increase or decrease. Our thinking about it does. And to that degree, we become less or more effective and less or more efficient in that message we're carrying. AA is stabilized over the last 20 years at about 2 million members. Addiction during that time is probably quadrupled. Suicide's at an all-time high. I would suggest it may be worth looking at the book and the underlying principles of it a little differently than we've all been taught in the culture we've developed, and start to actually consider that maybe this absolute source has been absolute the whole time and we know it, rather than we have to think we know it before we can express it. And I would say thinking we know it certainly helps our expression enormously because it eliminates the conflict of constantly thinking we need to get to it and figure it out. And it's up to us. We start intuitively taking the direction of that knowing source. And we don't think about intuition at all. We just act. And we act in loving, kind, generous ways. And our thinking about what's happening would be a lot more beneficial to everyone if we were operating on that basis than the basis of thinking all we're doing is trying to keep the ship balanced when it's already perfectly in balance. There is no imbalance in something that doesn't change. The simplicity and the practicality of it is that it does not change. It's ever present. It's constantly our experience. Whether we think it is or not, it affects that experience so that it becomes polluted and contaminated with more and more ideas that we think we need to fix, rather than say, those are all delusions anyhow. I'm not even hanging on to them, but with the thought right now that there's something to fix.
So do you practice the steps
I
in your life?
I practice the principles.
Okay.
That
So how do
step.
you practice step 10 and 11?
We're doing it.
So this is your step 11 or step 10?
Well, I mean, I don't think of something I do it 24 hours a day. I'm correcting and adjusting and looking and admitting and discussing and offering and receiving.
And you're doing all of that with your thoughts and actions.
All day long, yeah. And listen, I'm not good at it. I don't have the ability to have this conversation and not ruffle people, but I've learned that when people are ruffled, it's generally some form of reactivity in them that's being.
I mean, the common denominator is you. You should be able to have this conversation without ruffling people.
I don't believe that. I believe that.
I don't see why, if it's an all loving, beautiful message, it shouldn't ruffle people.
Then if everyone were saying, you'd be right. But the ruffling is actually beginning to bring people's attention to the fact.
I mean, is it possible that you're wrong?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you ever simmer on that and think about looking at it differently?
To any degree that I am managing thoughts that are not true is true, and I'm sure that I have cultural ideas and mythological superstitions and all kinds of stuff seemingly baked into my system. Yes, I do that. But they're based in thought. They're not based in reality.
Because you didn't ruffle my thoughts when you first presented this to me. I wasn't ruffled at all. I'm like, oh, this all-knowing, beginning to realize this awareness. And yes, it is not just when I meditate. It's with me all the time, of course. That all felt good. But then for some reason, it goes to another level that doesn't feel good. And I don't think it's me if that's happening to everyone you're engaging with.
Well, I would say it's not happening to everyone I engage with, but how they're seeing it reveals any reactivity in relation to something absolute. Because when the light comes on, if you're trying to hide something or trying to make believe you're not doing something, it's very unnerving to all of a sudden have to start feeling overwhelmed and feeling that somehow or another, I hear it a lot, I really was caught off guard. Well, that tells me that we're typically on guard. I certainly have been most of my life on guard. I don't want to let those limits expand immediately. I'm not always flexible in that regard. I react to people as a result. But I notice that it's my thinking that I'm defending a thought for that to be happening. It isn't just happening randomly in the universe and I'm condemned by some hateful, spiteful source. I'm creating that environment. I'm creating those thoughts. I'm reacting those ways.
And all of that creation, that whole transforming your reality, the power of thoughts is why I do all the things I do, because I'm creating and transforming my reality. When I start my day with Emmett Fox and Jesus Calling and my other readers, I am transforming my day. When I start my day with quietness, I have my cup of coffee and I just have quiet. I just listen to healing frequencies. I am at complete peace. It's almost like you don't have to have sex with your husband because you guys love each other and you don't need to do that act. That's just a practical solution. You don't need that. You just need to focus on how much you guys love each other. It's like, no, we need the practical act too, because it transforms our reality. It brings other things about that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Okay, so let me make a point. Transformation is all about forms. It's all about forms. That's what we're dealing with in this experience we're having, this life experience. It's about forms, life forms, informed, deformed, all that's about forms. So I'm suggesting that there is a substance Just like gravity. Think about gravity. You worry about whether or not it's going to hold you to Earth when you get up in the morning? Do you spend a lot of time in the morning in that doubt that you might have, thinking, wow, I wonder if gravity is going to work today, or this planet's just going to all of a sudden go haywire, and we're going to lose the sun and freeze to death? You think about that? No. You think about the trillions of chemical complications or interactions that seem complicated when we're thinking about them in your body? No. What do we think about? When we hurt, we start drawing our attention to something. What's the hurt tell us? Something's wrong. We have a perfect guidance system as our body language, and we mistake it by thinking we need to correct it and fix it, rather than notice we're fixing an effect, just like we did with drinking. It was an effect we were fixing, not the cause. What happens? Cause gets worse. Because I think the wrong thought now doesn't even exist. It's going to grow. Because I'm doing it, I'm causing it, but I'm not thinking I'm causing it. So it's going to grow. What do I have to do? More meditation, more running, more this, more that, rather than just know that I know, and to know that you know, and that any opposition and any conflict that comes out of it is a struggle to maintain the thinking we're doing in relation to it, which you're absolutely perfectly free to do. Literally free to do whatever you want in any way. And I'm not suggesting any of the things you are doing are wrong at all. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm suggesting that to the degree you believe that that connects you, it's just a belief. It's not reality, because you've never been disconnected. And to begin to concede this is actually to begin to see what I suspect Bill was talking about. He thought when he wrote that emotional sobriety letter that he was going to see a transformation within AA that began to deal with the traumas and the pains and the things that people didn't seem to be able to get to. He saw that potential. He also saw the potential that AA could be carried to people around the world, one person to another. He had a pretty clear vision to be able to see that. And yet the emotional sobriety thing didn't take. It's barely now part of the conversation. Most people haven't even read the letter, in my experience. It's barely now part of the conversation, while humanity has been functioning on a dysfunctional, insane level for centuries or millennia.
I do have to run. I appreciate your information. I will ponder it.
Yeah, just consider, sit with it and see if it's real, you know it. And to consider it will help you align with that in terms of the thinking. I do a lot of wrong thinking every day, Tara.
I do feel like everything you're saying contradicts the steps. And so not everything, but a lot of what you're saying contradicts what I've been working on actively for 8 years regularly.
Keep something in mind.
So my first thought is very defensive, because the steps saved my life. And I don't feel like walking around just knowing is gonna work.
I'm not saying ignore what's happening. I'm saying actually when you clear the windshield, you start seeing clearer what's actually going on, and it can be disturbing. Just like you said in relation to starting to witness people. You start to have some compassion that everybody is really struggling with.
Ignored my background, you're fine. Okay.
Anyway, see ya.
Okay. Until next time.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.